strategist who specializes in digital and emerging technologies. This means that I sit between the client and the creative teams and come up with ways to effectively achieve my clients' goals with things like websites and banner ads and social channels, but also things like APIs or games or applications, or sometimes digital components to real-world events. And the title of the talk is Faith in Reason, and I'm not going to be talking about ways of persuading customers. This is not a rational-based persuasion or emotional-based persuasion conversation. Instead, I want to talk about the process that we use in agencies or in marketing departments at companies to create good work, right? Whether we're pursuing an artistic, intuitively led creative approach or one that's a little bit more data-driven. And the reason I think that there's a tension worth addressing, in addition to seeing it all the time in my work, a quick story. There was an American client director who quit his job last summer. I don't know him personally. The reason I know he quit his job is that he posted a kind of angry breakup letter to his employer online, which, if anyone's wondering, I don't advocate that approach. If you're unhappy at your job, maybe just send that note to HR. But in this letter, he decried what he saw as a decline of storytelling and creatively led work in advertising, and he attributed a lot of the decline to data-driven decision-making. And I'm going to quote him. He said, "We've made a Faustian bargain with technology." A little hyperbolic. And setting aside the wisdom of using Faust as a metaphor in a field that I think a lot of people already view as soulless, he is giving voice to an anxiety that I think is very real. A lot of people who've worked in traditional mediums like television are uncomfortable with new ways of working. So before we talk about a solution to the problem, just a quick overview. You've probably seen a lot of these diagrams today. A brief history of creativity in advertising, right? So at the dawn of the century, advertising was mainly just repetition of product name and benefit, right? Gillette razors, they're sharp, Gillette. You go to the pharmacy, you recall the name, you buy the product. We had a creative revolution in advertising in America in the 1960s. It was led by guys like David Ogilvy and Leo Burnett and Bill Bernbach. And the new model for creativity was that we should be persuading consumers with emotional and psychological stories, right? So instead of Gillette razors, the sharpest razors, you have ads that sound more like a man with a clean-shaven face is a man who owns his own future. You know, we're telling people about themselves rather than merely about the products. And this model has proved incredibly enduring, right? If we had a nickel for every time we've heard the word storytelling just at this conference, we'd have a lot of nickels. And today, we're still telling stories. We're just telling them in a myriad new ways. And the stories have gone from being static stories we tell an audience to stories that the audience co-writes with us and participates in. Back quickly to Bill Bernbach. I have spent a lot of time thinking about this guy because I used to work at his agency. I worked at DDB for a long time. His ghost is still felt very much in that agency, and people talk about him a lot. And he has a wonderful quote that I think is still very true. Advertising is fundamentally persuasion, and persuasion happens to be not a science, but an art. This is an effective aphorism, and I wouldn't expect anything less from a great ad man. An aphorism is really just an advertisement for an idea, and the idea here is that you cannot mechanize creativity. Very true, Bill. But there's another evolution we need to talk about, and that's the evolution of measurement in advertising, or you could also call it the evolution of how we get paid. Right? When mere product repetition and name recognition was the goal of advertising, we measured success by how many people saw the ad or how many people could recall the product name. During the creative revolution, when we started deciding that telling stories was a more effective way to persuade people, accordingly, we started measuring how people felt about a brand, right? And we instituted things like brand tracker surveys, where we asked people what kind of feelings or emotions they associated with a brand, what a brand stood for, you know, this much more touchy-feely way of getting inside of a consumer's heart and mind, right? Today, if it can be said that there is a revolution in measurement, we are standing right in the middle of it. And I know that we've talked a lot about this over the past couple days. Because of multi-touch attribution and the availability of a wealth of data about what our consumers are doing after they see our ads, we're on the hook to our clients now for a lot more than, did you make them feel good about my brand? We're on the hook for, can you prove to me that your communications resulted in a sale? And more, I can prove that, right? I can take data and link it together from someone who saw an ad on a mobile device, who went to Amazon, browsed the product, bought the product, posted a review on that brand's Facebook page. This is becoming more and more possible. And this increased accountability has led to advertising agencies adopting models for producing and refining work that look a lot more like a test and learn approach that you might find in a development group or a startup, right? And I won't belabor this because I think that from what little Swedish I understand, that Lisa was talking a lot about A/B testing and multivariate testing. We're beginning to introduce these approaches into all of the digital communications that we make for brands, right? We have a hypothesis, we have a goal that we want to achieve with the user. We build a bunch of different creative approaches, we send them out into the world, and we test them in a live environment. This runs counter to what a lot of traditional creatives are used to doing, right? The traditional model is belabor something, work on it, test it in an artificial environment like a focus group until it's absolutely perfect, and then send it out into the world and like cross your fingers and hope it works, and 4 months later you get the results. That's not how things work anymore. It's much cheaper and more effective to test a variety of things in a digital environment, find out in real time, based on real users interacting in an organic way with it, what works, go back and change, do it all again. So how do we overcome this antagonism? I'm going to talk about the ways in which I think experiment-driven approaches to making advertising actually create a really positive environment for creativity. I don't think that technology should be seen as stifling creativity at all, or that data-driven approaches to decision-making are in any way stifling. In fact, I think that they do a lot of great things for creative teams. The first is that data-driven approaches encourage risk-taking. I noticed there were some gliders in the last presentation. This must be the standard metaphor for productive failure. But this is one of the Wright brothers' manned gliders, right? They used to test kites to figure out aerodynamic principles and to test different designs, and then they would graduate to a glider flying at a low height with maybe one pilot. And of course, most of them crashed because that's what they were supposed to do. And the worst thing that happened was that a guy got a little banged up, right? No casualties, no serious loss. Testing in a live environment is a lot like that. There's no such thing as a completely unmanned flight, right? You're always dealing with real users, but we're talking about a sample set of 100 or 200 users who are encountering a communication. We're not talking about a media buy for television that reaches 10 million people. Why is a risk-positive environment great for creatives? Historically, when we go in to bring a company ideas for a campaign, we have a range of options, right? We develop some that are very safe. Maybe we have one campaign that looks just like the campaign from last year. We have some that are a little more forward-thinking. But invariably, there are all these great, really risky, really cutting-edge ideas that end up on the cutting room floor. A lot of them don't even make it to the pitch. And if they do make it to the pitch, a lot of times the clients say, well, I love what you've done, let's go with the safe one. In a pro-risk environment, you have more opportunity to bring forward those ideas and test them and let the ideas speak for themselves, right? It's no longer up to the courage of the particular client in the room or the courage of your creative director to determine whether or not an idea has merit. You have an opportunity to test it in a real environment. The second way that test and learn is great for creativity is that it posits very few fixed truths. Here's Charlton Heston in the 10 Commandments looking very severe. The internet is a shifty place, right? What was true 2 weeks ago may no longer be true. Facebook may have changed their algorithm, or all of the 18-year-olds I'm trying to reach on Instagram think Instagram is lame now and they're over on Snapchat, or the consumers that I used to engage on a desktop to shop for electronics now buy everything over a mobile device, right? The landscape is constantly shifting. And we're asked to be experts in platforms and technologies that are sometimes extremely young. I don't know how anyone can be an expert in something that's only been around for 2 weeks, unless you built it yourself, in which case you are the expert. I have a pet peeve in my industry, which is being asked to provide best practices, right? A lot of times clients come to me and they say, can you give me best practices for X or Y? And what they mean is, can you give me a set of rules to follow that will guarantee success? My least favorite one of all time was, can I please have a list of best practices for creating a viral video? And I said, you might as well ask me to predict where lightning will strike. I can't give you a set of best practices for viral videos. They're mercurial by nature. That's the very definition. But we could put up some lightning rods, right? And this is a great environment for a creative team that's seeking to challenge the status quo, right? If everything is shifting, if very little is set in stone, you have an opportunity to try radical new approaches that previously might not have gotten anyone's attention. Third, testing in a live environment uncovers authentic insights. It occurred to me this morning when I was looking at this that this might insinuate that I look at my consumers as monkeys. That is not my intention. So the way that we traditionally do research in advertising is sort of an artificial construct, right? We put together a focus group, or maybe we administer a survey, or we do usability testing at a designated facility. There's something called the Hawthorne effect, or the observer effect, which basically says that anytime you tell a subject they're being tested, you automatically corrupt the responses you're going to get. Because as human beings, we want to please the tester. We are responding to an interaction with another person, and just knowing that we're being observed changes our behavior. I've seen this in practice. A couple years ago, I was working for a Swedish electronics manufacturer, actually, and we were doing usability testing on a website, like a product detail page. I was a middle-aged man, and if you've never been to usability testing, it's the most fun. It's like being in an episode of Law and Order. You sit behind a one-way mirror and you watch somebody be interrogated. And his administrator was a very pretty young woman, and she was asking him about the product detail page, and he said, "This is pretty good, but I'd really like to see more mechanical diagrams of the refrigerator." And she was like, "Oh, what would they tell you about the appliance that you'd need to know?" And he goes, "Well, I just really feel like I ought to be able to see, you know, the guts of the thing." And the problem with this was that the readout from the session said, "Insight, consumers want mechanical diagrams of refrigerator." No, they don't. The readout from that was, "Middle-aged man seeks to impress pretty young administrator by acting macho." You know, it's not always what it appears to be. And this is true of ourselves. We're not always intentionally deceiving. I installed an application in my browser, a plugin on my browser, to monitor my own productivity. And if you had asked me the week before I installed it, like, "Where do you waste all your time, Charlotte?" I would have been like, "Oh, probably technology blogs. I'm just doing research for work." It's all shoe shopping. Like, I was wrong about even my own time wasting. I'm not even able to accurately self-report my own behavior. Testing in a live environment cuts through that. It means that you're not really testing, you're simply observing the way that consumers interact with your content in an organic live environment. They're not part of a test, they're simply going about their business on the internet, interacting with things. So why are more authentic insights great for creativity? Any good creative director worth their salt will tell you that the best concepts, the best campaigns are built on some sort of human truth. And when we're using this kind of A/B testing or live testing as an augmentation to what we already learned through traditional research methods, we're getting closer to that like really good nugget of truth that's going to yield a really powerful campaign. Finally, why is it good for creativity? It fosters humility. This is Nabokov, one of my favorite authors, looking very humble with his butterfly net, and he's up there because he said something that has always stuck with me about the creative process. He said, "I have rewritten, often more than once, every word I've ever published. My pencils outlast their erasers." And I think that increasingly this is the world that we live in when we are building digital products. We have an acronym in my industry for the deciding factor when a bunch of smart people are deadlocked about what to do. We call it the HIPPO, which is the highest paid person's opinion. And unfortunately, that's often how decisions get made, right? That doesn't mean they're the most qualified person, it simply means the person with the most authority. even in a best case scenario, I've been in situations where you get all the people who should know what to do together in a room. You get the user experience designer and your analytics person and your A+ producer and your best web designer and your developer. And we all think we've built an experience that's going to be super effective, and we launch it and it tanks. And we're the ones with the most experience, and we don't even know how to respond to very specific instances for specific consumers. We have to test to find out. Humility is a necessary attribute for navigating this world. And if there's one thing I could leave you with, my pencils outlast their erasers kind of gave rise to this goofy illustration, right? This is the old way of doing things. We produce a lot of work and we revise infrequently. When we're working in digital mediums, we should be a little bit more like this second kind of obscene pencil, right? We build a lot of work, but we also revise a lot of work. And my vision for an agency or a marketing department that trucks in technology is one that is enlivened by the processes that we use to build digital products rather than stifled, right? I don't see any reason that a data-based approach to decision-making can't fuel creativity rather than hindering it. And that's all for me. Thank you very much.
You got that right.
Tack så mycket.
Tack så mycket.
Tack så mycket.
Perfect. Charlotte, thank you very much for sharing. It's really been a theme for this morning around both you and Lisa really sort of addressed the same issues. Tell me, and Lisa has also been working out of New York, but you being stationed there, and we have maybe seen Mad Men, the TV series. How
Yes.
glamorous is the work at Madison Avenue, or is that where you're working? No, maybe not.
When I was at DDB, I was on Madison Avenue for about 5 years. Now I'm down in this kind of sexy building over by the East River. It's really cool. Is it glamorous? Yeah, it's glamorous. Everybody's really good looking and they drink a lot. It's a lot of fun. It's also still very much like young person's industry, right? Like we have a very diverse staff and a lot of really young people, and it's high pressure and exciting, and sometimes it's kind of sexy. Sometimes it's terrible. Sometimes it's not like that at all. I mean, usability testing is never featured on Mad Men. Peggy's never sitting behind a one-way mirror watching a guy click through a wireframe.
We're sometimes looking here from a Swedish perspective, maybe why one of the reasons for that is we're in love with the US, but looking for the next big thing happening over in the US. So tell me, coming from New York, what is the next big thing?
The next big thing is for my clients is probably going to be how to navigate communications in the Internet of Things, right? I don't think we're going to keep referring to it as the Internet of Things, but the next big challenge for me is really how do I effectively use connected devices and the just myriad data points to build more effective and relevant communications.
Would you say that even the marketing departments is into that discussion?
Absolutely, especially if you are a company that traffics in technology in any way, right? Most of the hardware and appliances we're building now in a variety of industries is smart, right? Is web-enabled. So increasingly, I think that that's going to be a field we all need to become experts in.
Right. Do you work mainly with consumer-oriented brands or also business-oriented?
I do some B2B, but at this point I'm mostly consumer-oriented brands. In the course of my career, I've run the gamut. I prefer the consumer-facing brands just because they're a little more fun and a little more exciting. B2B presents its own set of challenges.
My following question would be how much those two words is merging together. I mean, it's been a difference in communications and marketing in the B2B world, I guess, compared to the one that we're using in the B2C world. How much are those two worlds blending these days?
Blending in the places where what we would previously have considered a consumer is engaging in entrepreneurial activity, right? So there's a whole new range of products and services for people who work for themselves, and increasingly I see a workforce that looks more like that and less like a full-time staff. So there's sort of a gray area between the small business and micro business of one, and there's a range of products and services that are moving in to fill that niche.
Right. Your first visit to Sweden, right?
My first visit to Sweden.
And even though you haven't been able to follow the discussions in detail, but what do you bring back? What kind of things will you tell your colleagues when you come back? How was it in Sweden?
I love it here. The food is amazing. Everyone's smart and good looking. Swedes are very well dressed. It's true. Swedes are very, very well put together.
Wow. That's one way to answer the question. Another one would be more of sort of, you know, business related, the discussion around internet or communications.
Oh, sure.
We're happy to have your comments on the way we look, but it's.
I mean, this to me looks a lot like the conversations I've been having are not different from the conversations I'm having in Silicon Alley or on the West Coast. I think that startup culture is vibrant here, and you know, everyone is thinking about technology in the same way that we are and asking the same questions and encountering the same challenges. It seems like we're very much on the same track in terms of the pace.
And how long are you staying?
Until Saturday.
So you're going to have a lot of discussions with the audience later on here out during lunch.
Yeah, I have to warn you, so strategists are very chatty, so you've been warned.
Great, thank you for coming.
Thank
it's been
you
a pleasure
very
to have you
much.
here,
It's my
and thank you
pleasure.
for the presentation.
Thank you.
Awesome.